On this episode of the DTVC podcast, Sean Malloy from I Must Break This Podcast is back, and we are looking at Six Bullets, the second of three films Jean-Claude Van Damme did with director Ernie Barbarash. Now, the first of those three, Assassination Games, Sean and I have already covered. It was back in episode 262 of the podcast. So I'll put the link to that in this podcast description, so if you want, you can go back and listen to that one after. And then the third one, Pound of Flesh, that one's where we're looking at, we haven't set a date for that one yet, but at some point we'll probably do that one as well. But right now, this episode, Six Bullets, coming up here in just a little bit. And then next week, Mitch Lovell from the Video Vacuum is back. And we're going to the Neil Breen pool. We're doing Fateful Findings. So that'll be next week. Keep an eye. It was definitely a fun one to finally do my first Neil Breen film. There'll be a review at some point after this episode airs, so we'll get Neil Breen on the site as well. But so that'll be next week. Also, quick mention too, in 2 weeks' time, Mitch has a new book coming out. It's called The Video Vacuum Strikes Back. So keep an eye out for that. It looks like the date for that is August 17th. Is the release date. Only $5 on Kindle, so that's not a bad deal at all. So again, August 17th. I'll put the link in the podcast description for that as well. The only thing is next week we'll talk about it a little bit more, but again, the episode, you can actually pre-order it now if you want. So you could get it now, and then it'll be auto-delivered to your Kindle device on the 17th if you want to do it that way as well. So the link for that is in the podcast description as well. And then in terms of DTVC Extra, I think I had talked a little bit about maybe doing an episode on Marvel pilots / backdoor pilots, right? So like TV movies that were supposed to be pilots for TV shows that never got picked up, because there's 5 of those, crazy enough. So there's the Doctor Strange movie, and then there's the 2 Hulk TV movies. The Return of the Incredible Hulk, that was a backdoor pilot for a Thor show that never got picked up. Trial of the Incredible Hulk was a backdoor pilot for a Daredevil series that never got picked up. Then you have Generation X and Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., 2 Fox shows that didn't get picked up for, they're just pilots as well. So maybe talk about those. I was going to do that this weekend, but actually I'm going to see Spider-Man, the new Spider-Man movie this weekend. So I'll probably do a smaller DTVC Extra giving you my thoughts on that, which I think at this stage, everybody else has already given their thoughts on it, so I'll be a little late. Also, I'm going to be recording soon with Freddie Young from Full Moon Reviews, and we'll talk about that movie plus some other movies that have come out in the meantime, like probably The Odyssey. He'll probably give us his thoughts on The Odyssey, because that movie will be as what Ty calls a library movie. If you've heard him mention anything about that when he's been on the podcast, right? The idea of a library movie is something that you wait till it's out on DVD and you rent it, you get it for free from the library, and you kind of sit and watch it at your own time. I think that's probably what The Odyssey will end up being for me. But definitely Spider-Man this weekend, I'll be checking that out. So I'll probably do a DTVC Extra on that. So look for that this weekend. And then in a couple of weeks' time, I'll do that one on the Marvel TV movies that didn't become TV shows. And then in terms of the site, this past weekend we did our PM movie for the month of August. We did Private Wars, starring Steve Railsback. So that was a fun one to discuss. Also, not an easy one to find, but it is on YouTube, and so I do have a YouTube playlist that has all the kind of the PM movies that I've found to this point. I think John might have one as well. After Movie Dynamite, I'm not sure, but because I know there's more than like the 40 or 50 that I have found on there. So so if you're curious, you can always check us out on YouTube. Again, you should like and subscribe on YouTube as well. I am noticing that we're getting more streams of the podcast episodes on YouTube. So I don't know if that's people moving from Spotify and finding it's better on YouTube, or if it's new people. If it's new people, welcome. I will say too, if you're a new person who was thinking you were going to get the full movie, and instead you're getting us talking about the movie, you're getting audio only of us talking about the movie. I'm sorry that you ended up in that situation. Hopefully the word podcast in the title tipped you off, and you're like, okay, it's not the whole movie, it's just some guys talking about it. But if that was the case, I'm sorry for that. But anyway, I am happy that we are getting more people on YouTube. So if you're coming and you're liking the podcast, definitely let us know. Drop a comment, give a like, that kind of thing. I always appreciate that. But anyway, back to the site. So Private Wars was last week. This Thursday, I'm going to do Shepherd Code LaPierre. So we'll get that movie reviewed. That was one that was discussed back on the podcast with Ty. I think that was episode 269 with Ty, where we did Shepherd, Code LaPierre, and Clear Cut. So yeah, we'll get a review on the site for it as well. It's got Don the Dragon Wilson in it. You got to do every Don the Dragon Wilson movie anyway, but I think it's good to kind of give my thoughts in a more written way for an independent movie like that one, beyond Ty and I talking about it as well. So keep an eye out for that on Thursday. And then this weekend, more Jean-Claude Van Damme. We're going to be doing We Die Young. So that was another one that was covered on a podcast. What was that? That was episode 246, We Die Young. I did that with Sean Malloy from I Must Break This podcast as well. So you can check that one out in the archives as well. But that'll be this weekend's review. Every time I hear the name We Die Young, I think of the Power Station song We Die for Love, right? Or We Fight for Love? We Fight for Love, I think is what it was, right? From Commando. But in my head, right, I'm like, we die for young, doo-doo. Yeah, so I don't know how those kind of songs get in my head, but that's kind of how that happens. And probably if I'm starting to do things like that, it's probably time for us to close the cold open and get on with the podcast episode. Before we do, though, of course, Mark and Sales, Kindle Unlimited, and in paperback. You can check that out. Like I said, Kindle Unlimited seems to be a way people like to do that. If you're already subscribed to Kindle Unlimited, you can go in, read some pages of my book. I get paid for the pages that you read. So if you're already subscribed to Kindle Unlimited, check it out that way. Or you can always buy the paperback as well. The paperback's a little bit more expensive, but you've got it on your shelf, and there it is. Mark and Sales, nice blue cover. It'll look good if you've got, I know most of the people listening here, when you're doing Zoom backgrounds, you've probably got your physical media, for like movies and things like that. But, if you need to have books in your background there, my books look really great in a Zoom background. So just throwing that out there as well. All right. Why don't we stop this rambling here? John from Miscellaneous Plumbing Fixtures will play in our theme song. And then when we come back, Sean Malloy from I Must Break This podcast is on. And we are going to be looking at 6 bullets. Hey everyone, welcome back to the DTVC podcast. As always, this is Matt here, and we're joined once again by Sean Malloy from I Must Break This podcast, ready to talk some more Jean-Claude Van Damme. Welcome back, Sean.
Oh man, it's always a pleasure. You know me, I always enjoy talking Van Damme. So thanks for making me your go-to on this journey. I appreciate it.
No, I appreciate you coming on as well. This has been a ton of fun talking about these movies. It was something we kind of fell into. You came on and talked about a couple different ones, and it's like, yeah, there's so many good Van Damme direct-to-video ones there's plenty to talk about with these.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and I think I've said it before, and I'll echo it again. It's really kind of nice. I get to kind of live vicariously through you in this show, because when my show I Must Break This podcast closed up, I thought, oh man, it'd be really cool to do a deep dive into the filmography of Van Damme, because I don't think that there were a couple podcasts about between 5 to 8 years ago that did that, but then a lot of them just kind of dropped off. They didn't really finish up the journey, if you will. So this is kind of cool. Like I said, I get to kind of live vicariously through you and your show and discuss these films. Plus, as I'm sure you can relate as well, it's always kind of cool to meet someone similar who has an affinity for these films, because it's kind of rare, at least locally, I should say. It's kind of rare for me to find local people that wanna chat these films.
No, I think that is like the niche that back when I started the direct-to-video connoisseur back in like 2007. And, my plan was to just do all direct-to-video, all genres of direct-to-video. But the action one was the one that people sort of, I don't say glommed onto, but that's the one that people engaged with more because, like you said, there weren't a lot of people talking about low budget direct to video action, and whereas like horror, it's like you could post a direct to video, you could post like a horror movie that's like came out the same time as this Van Damme movie we're going to talk about today, and it might have double the critic reviews on IMDb, and there's tons of podcasts talking about that kind of thing. But the action stuff, like there's not a lot of people talking about, especially like you said, like people talk about Van Damme, but not necessarily these Van Damme movies. So you and I having these conversations, it's filling a I don't know if niche is the right word, but it's sort of it's scratching an itch for a lot of people out there that are listening.
Yeah, well, and I don't think this is really scratching the itch for our significant others because I can't imagine that our our respective wives are really looking to have a deep dive into the films of Jean-Claude Van Damme. What's interesting, and I've said this too, in his prime, when he was the contract boy for Universal Pictures, you look at films like Time Cop, Sudden Death, even Lionheart, Hard Target, those films, and they're fun. They're of course for action fans, but I've always long said that those films are more pardon the pun, but universal in a sense to where, yeah, you could be a Van Damme fan, but the way I like to put it is, if you have a film like Time Cop or Sudden Death on, those are more universal to where if your mom or your significant other walk into the room, they're probably gonna sit down and enjoy it as well. Once Jean-Claude hit the direct-to-video market, the films were much more niche. They were much more made specifically for his fan base and his fan base alone. You know what I mean? Like there was not going to be the common, the casual, viewer, if you will, that were going to be seeking these particular films out.
No, you make a great point because it's a little different from Seagal, where Seagal, and I think we've talked about this before, where Seagal just kind of kept making his movies, but with more and more of his input, which made them even worse over time. And I think people that would go to like Blockbuster at that time, or if they see it on Netflix, but I think mostly like Blockbuster and video stores, where they'd see Seagal on the cover and say, "Huh, this looks like it could be one of those movies that I remember. I'll watch it." And depending on how good or bad it was, if it was like in the level like a Pistol Whip, maybe people will be like, "Okay, he's kind of still got it." Whereas you get some of the real bonkers ones that he did, and people are like, "What is this?" Like he didn't stand the entire movie. He just sat the whole time. I think with Van Damme, like what we've been talking about is that if somebody were to stumble upon, say, like Replicant, or one of his, or In Hell or something like that, and they'd be like, okay, well, this isn't anything like, In Hell isn't anything like Death Warrant, but this is kind of interesting. This is a different movie from him, and so I think people they're probably not necessarily getting what they expect when they get Van Damme at the video store, but it's like I think it's at least it's something I think that a lot of people respected.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, what's interesting is, whereas guys like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone, where their careers kind of paralleled each other, and they were in a sort of competition with each other. The same goes with Steven Seagal and Van Damme. You know what I mean? I mean, they both kind of came up around the late 80s, early 90s. And so they were kind of in a form of competition. But then when we get to what's very interesting is how both Seagal and Van Damme, they both kind of hit the direct to video market around the same time. And I vividly remember when this particular film came out, because this film came out off the heels of Assassination Games, we should
Yeah.
probably say, which was
Yeah.
also directed by Ernie Barbarash. And so what's very interesting, I think, about it is by the time this film came out, I was still actively checking out Jean-Claude's stuff, whereas Seagal, I think, at least for me, I can't speak for every fan, but I think a lot of people, myself included, I'd given up on Seagal around 2004, 2005, because it just became the same old, same old. I mean, and it just became kind of a joke. It became kind of, laughable seeing him in the same types of movies, doing the same thing with the terrible dubbing. I mean, we've talked about all of the Seagal tropes. Whereas if you watch this film, I mean, yeah, it's low budget and there's some things that we're going to be getting into, I imagine, about it, but you can still see that, I mean, Jean-Claude is still fit. He is still delivering a fairly decent performance. He's still kind of relying a little bit on that sad, damn, morose thing, but he does come alive a little bit more. But I read one review that kind of alluded to the same thing that I'm discussing, is how, both he and Seagal were kind of occupying the same space, the direct-to-video medium, if you will. But by this point, it was kind of like, okay, Jean-Claude had definitely surpassed his competition and was delivering a better product. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, yeah, most definitely. Because I mean, again, this is probably, people can check it off their bingo card that I'll mention the Ben Sachs interview on your podcast, on I Must Break This Podcast. But he spoke to this when he said that Seagal just kept coming to him and saying, "I need another movie. I need another movie," and it was essentially, essentially asking Ben Sachs' line producer, or whoever, to pump out the same thing. Let's get Keone Waxman in the door. Let's do this, and I just need $1 million. I need to make this movie. Whereas I think with Van Damme, there wasn't that sense of like, I need this money. I need this money. It was more like, okay, now that I'm not like beholden to the studio system and I'm not trying to worry about, am I going to have the biggest blockbuster ever or anything like that, I can actually stretch out and do different kinds of things. And it's a very different mindset, where Seagal's like, I'm just going to keep pumping out the same thing I've done for the past 10 years, and hopefully it'll pull me another couple $1 million. Van Damme's like, what's something that's different or interesting about these characters that I can do and I can pull from?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what's really wild when you think about it is around 2002 or so, that's when Van Damme had officially become this direct to video guy, right? And so because he was going direct to video, you look at all of the films, and they're all, not only are they all suddenly set in Europe, but they're all obviously filmed in Europe, right? Especially more on the eastern side. But they make the most of what they can with their budget. I mean, it's not like they're painting Bulgaria or whatever it is as being America. I mean, they're being honest that this takes place in Eastern Europe, and for the most part, the story that is structured around the setting works, especially with the film that we're talking about today.
Yeah, no, I agree there. And I think, one thing too about Van Damme is that it feels like, because he's from Brussels originally, and this is maybe a little different from Dolph, who obviously, is from Sweden, but it feels like Van Damme was always more European. And, when he would make these movies in America, it was like always this excuse of, how can we make him French? Like, oh, you and your twin brother were separated at birth, and one of you was raised by a French, in a French orphanage or something. It's like there's always a reason why he spoke French. Whereas, in a movie like this, like Six Bullets, that takes place in Moldova, but, shot in Romania, he doesn't have to worry about his accent. He can be from anywhere. It doesn't, he can be a French, he can be from Belgium, he can be from France, and so he can actually lead into being European. Whereas with Seagal, they always had to have reasons why he was in Eastern Europe. He was a former CIA guy. He was, all these different things. That's why he's traveling around Europe. At least it's almost like kind of the reverse of what it was like in the 90s with their big careers, where Seagal never had to explain why he was an American in America, being a police officer and stuff like that. But Van Damme always had to explain it. Now it's the other way around, and Seagal's the one we have to figure out why he's in Europe, whereas Van Damme, of course, it makes sense that he's in Europe.
Yeah, and I have to imagine it had to be a little more I don't know if liberating is the best term to describe it, but for a guy like Jean-Claude, and especially for these productions, because yes, if you compare something like this to Time Cop, it's working with a fraction of the budget of Time Cop. I think Time Cop had a budget of like in the between 30 to 40 million or something like that. This is obviously not working with that at all. But at the same hand too, like you said, yes, it's able to lean into its European setting, right? It's able to kind of make the most of that, and use its locale pretty wisely. I mean, and what's really cool about this one too is, I don't know if you remember this at all, but I remember Assassination Games. I want to say that one came to DVD. Oh boy, I want to say that one came to DVD in the spring of 2011. Okay. And then I remember the turnaround for this one was quick. And I think the big reason for that is because Expendables 2 had come out. So I think Sony was pretty wise to where they were like, okay, let's get the ball rolling on this one. Okay, because clearly Jean-Claude and Ernie Barbarash they seem to have a pretty good working relationship. All right, let's get the ball rolling on this one, and let's get it out to DVD pretty quick so we can kind of capitalize and bank on the success of Expendables 2. So yeah, Expendables 2 came out in August of 2012. This was put out on DVD September 11th of 2012. So barely a month after Expendables 2. So I think it really kind of came at a sweet spot for Jean-Claude, you know.
You know, that's something you make a point that I never considered before because this isn't the only one that comes out in 2012 for Van Damme. You know, we also get Universal Soldier Day of Reckoning, which I
Yep.
think, you know, that one comes out before this one. This one comes out, that one comes out in October of 2012. But I almost think with Universal Soldier Day of Reckoning, and, you know, maybe the same thing with Six Bullets, but at least with Day of Reckoning, they would have known, okay, this is Dolph and Van Damme. So let's cash in on Expendables 2 because that's also Dolph and Van Damme. But I think once the buzz caught on how good of a performance Van Damme turned in, it was like, yeah, people are going to be going back to his catalog, but they're also going to want to go to the video store. Or I guess 2012, the video store was maybe on its way out, but they're at least going to be going on their Netflix queues to try to find stuff, or you know, going into the DVD bins at the store or something like that. And yeah, I never really thought about it because 2012 is a big year. He has like 4 or 5 movies that come out that year, and I can kind of see how they would have all said, okay, let's capitalize on him being on the big screen again.
Yeah, and you know it's funny that you mentioned Universal Soldier Day of Reckoning and everything because with this film, I don't know if you picked up on it or not, but I have a sneaking suspicion that the character that I didn't get the character's name, but the father of the kidnapped girl, played by Joe Flanagan or
Oh
whatever.
yes, yeah.
Um, I have a sneaking suspicion. I'd be willing to bet that that role was written for Scott Adkins and with Scott Adkins in mind. However, because he's the lead in Universal Soldier Day of Reckoning, and so I imagine he was just kind of like, I don't have the time to devote to this one. And maybe, I mean, look, I mean, this had come off the heels of Assassination Games as well, so maybe a team up with Scott Adkins back to back once again maybe wasn't in the best interest. I don't know, but you look at if I could, I mean, I know we're kind of jumping around. I actually really liked this film. I will admit, I really liked this film. But if there's one thing about it that's never really gelled with me, even on my first watch of this one, it's the Joe Flanagan character. I cannot understand why they would make him a mixed martial artist fighter when he really doesn't do much fighting. He gets one scene in a bar, and then he gets another scene where he punches a guy, and then another scene where he chokes a guy out or breaks his neck or whatever. Which I guess in the end is much more than you can expect. But I mean, it is very interesting that they make him. He's this MMA fighter who's traveled to Moldova for an upcoming fight, and they really don't do much with that MMA background like you would think. I mean, as I was watching this again, this was the third time I've seen it. I was watching it and I was thinking they could have just made the dad like a computer chip salesman or something like that. You know what I mean? And I think it probably would have still played the same, you know?
Yeah, you know, I wonder too. Now, I never considered this before, this idea that maybe Adkins was offered this role first, because you could almost see, like, because if you look at some of the other roles that Adkins gets around this time, you know, obviously, you know, Universal Soldier Day of Reckoning, right, he has a bigger part in that. Zero Dark 30 as well, he would have been making around this time. And Ninja Shadow of a Tear comes out in 2012 or 2013. So I wonder if he looked at this part and was just like, yeah, you know what? I don't know if I want to play second fiddle to Van Damme again. Um,
Right.
but by the same token, I think then it's like, okay, well, this part probably could have been written for Atkins. And it's like, okay, well, now we got to scramble to get somebody else. Okay, we'll get Joe Flanagan. He works, you know, we'll give him a neck tattoo and some spiky hair and, you know, designer jeans, and he'll look the part of an MMA fighter. And,
Yeah.
you know, but then it's like, okay, now we've got to dial this thing back because we got to figure out. I mean, Joe Flanagan toting you know, an assault rifle at the end of the movie doesn't look quite the same as Adkins toting an assault rifle at the end of the
It's
movies.
weird. It's
Yeah,
weird. Yeah. I mean, I can only imagine because there's a germ of some good ideas here. I will say. I mean, in the end, I feel bad, man. I feel like I'm kind of bouncing around here.
that's okay. No
Okay.
worries.
I will say I actually really liked this one much more than I did on my initial viewing. You know, I know we've kind of touched upon this and we've said this before, so I don't want to be a broken record. But you know, it's those rose colored glasses. We didn't
Yeah.
know how good we had it back in 2012, which is really weird to think. I mean, but that was a good, what, 14 years ago now at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean. So I remember seeing it for the first time and thinking, oh, it's another low budget Van Damme movie. You know what I mean? But I watch it now and it's just like wow, like it's. I mean, can we first of all say this is for a direct-to-video action movie? This movie is almost 2 hours in length.
Right.
Okay,
Yes. Yeah.
which is kind of unheard of. I mean, if you wanted that, they could have stripped about 15, 20 minutes off this movie, made it 90 minutes, and it probably still would have played just as well. But I think giving it those extra minutes, what it does is it really allows Van Damme to really develop a character. Okay, and we really get to see him develop his character has a full arc. Let's just say it. I mean, he has the full redemption arc. He has a relationship with his son, played by his real life son in the movie. So we get to see that kind of develop. And then the secondary character, the supporting character, the Joe Flanagan character, we get to see, he and his wife have a lot to chew on. They're given a lot here, which is kind of unheard of in a direct to video action film. I said this, I remember when I was discussing a number of years ago, Castle Falls with Dolph and Scott Adkins. It's a 90-minute, direct to video, low budget action movie like we've seen before. But what I think I really appreciated about that one was the amount of character development that it gave to both Dolph's character and Scott Adkins' character, which you really don't see too much in this particular market. And so I really liked that about this particular film. But like I said, it's very interesting because, okay, I mean, if we just break it down, this film is basically Taken, right? You know what I mean? It's basically the story of Taken with Liam Neeson. The narrative impetus is that Joe Flanagan, his wife and his daughter, they travel to is it Moldova?
Moldova. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, they travel to Moldova because he is looking at getting a comeback fight or whatever. And then, of course, his daughter is kidnapped by some human traffickers. So he and his wife enlist the help of Jean-Claude's character, who is a mercenary known for retrieving children. I guess we should say that that's the basic premise. But when you hear that going in, a mixed martial artist fighter, you kind of think that what it's going to be is okay, this American MMA badass is going to team up with this European mercenary, and they're just going to wreak havoc through Moldova, where Van Damme is using his spec ops training, and then we have this American rough and tumble dude. He's going to be using his training, and that's what we're getting. Unfortunately, it doesn't do that, which is kind of a perk, but at the same hand also kind of a disadvantage, because like you said, it's kind of like, okay, if they couldn't get a Scott Adkins or an actual fighter for the role, and they have Joe Flanagan, who it's very clear that they're trying to find like a Scott Adkins analog, if you will. You know what? Then don't make him an MMA guy. You know what I mean? Just make it to where he's, this American diplomat, trying to broker a business deal, and he brings his kid along. You know what I mean? I think if they had done that, you wouldn't have really lost much going down the pipeline,
No, and I think part of the reason why they made him the mixed martial arts guy was that at that time period, mixed martial arts was kind of on the ascendancy, and there was a sense that it may even creep into being, one of the top sports in America. Maybe, maybe not like a top four. We think of the four big ones, but it was building in that way. Now it's this like niche thing and it kind of holds more of a right wing space in American sports. But at that time, they thought, okay, this thing is growing, and so we're going to kind of cash in on that. But to your point, once you find out you can't get Adkins, that maybe you don't worry so much about trying to cash in on something like that, and you do something else instead. And we can make computer guys cool enough. I think that would have worked, and it would have made more sense there. But yeah, and I think the other thing that's interesting with the wife is that they go through this story arc with her where she's like, oh, my dad's ex-army, and suddenly she can handle a gun, and she's able to put a silencer on a gun and all that stuff. And it's like, I always joke, my dad's a brick mason and I cannot build a chimney. I have no idea. So just because somebody's dad does something doesn't mean that everybody else knows how to do what their dad can do.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's the other thing too, is it kind of takes this it's not a complete 180 by any means, but it does take a turn going down a path where you're kind of thinking like, okay, what are we doing here? Um, where basically he and his wife suddenly throw the rules out the window, okay, and he snaps this dude's neck and picks up this AK assault rifle or whatever, and then his wife says, "Oh, my dad was former army, so I know how to handle a gun." And so it's kind of like, okay, well, if that's the case, then why did you even need Jean Claude's character? You know what I mean? And so you kind of think at a moment when you see the story kind of go down that path, you kind of think to yourself, well, wouldn't it more intriguing story have been taken Jean Claude's character Sam Gall completely out of the film and just been about this husband and wife? You know what I mean? And now that I'm kind of verbalizing it and maybe doing a little bit of verbal diarrhea, but wouldn't that have been kind of interesting? He and his wife are kind of on the outs, and they kind of learn to grow together and build their marriage together again as they're trying to find their daughter, and are kind of resorting to violence to do it. You know what I mean? I don't know if that would have been the movie that we would have really wanted to see, but it is interesting that it goes down that path, and then they're wrecking havoc and they're kicking ass. Meanwhile, Jean Claude's character is on top of a hill being a sniper, and it's kind of like, okay, wait a minute here. we came here for Van Damme, not for Joe Flanagan and his wife. You know what I mean? Like what's going on? Who's the character we're supposed to follow here?
Right. And I wonder too, because, Ernie Barbarash, it feels like when he makes these movies that, it still has that sort of that fantastic element of an action movie, but it does feel like he wants to ground them a little bit more. And of course, that's what we get some real disturbing moments in this movie. Because again, I think he wants the sort of the reality of what human trafficking is. So you get those real disturbing moments. But I wonder too if he's like, well, if I just have Van Damme go in by himself and take all these guys out, no one will believe it. But if they can help out a little bit and kind of, even the odds a little bit, then maybe you know, it'll be more believable. And but in a way, it kind of makes things uneven in his attempt to make it more, it's almost like in the context of an action movie, it actually is more believable if the hero goes in by himself and kills everybody, than to have a couple actors that aren't really comfortable in those kind of roles, but make them seem like they're comfortable and have it not really work as well.
Well, the other thing too that we also have to acknowledge and take note of is this was around the time, if you remember, okay, it's always interesting kind of go back and play a Monday morning quarterback, but this was also around the time where our action heroes that we love and idolize and watch were getting older. And so what a lot of these productions were doing was they were casting, okay, here's the aging action star, but we need a younger guy in there to kind of do a lot of the action and do a lot of the heavy lifting to kind of help prop up the old guy, if you will. So you could argue and you could say, well, maybe that's what they were kind of doing with this particular film. However, I mean, let's just say, no disrespect to Joe Flanagan, okay, he did a fine job in this movie, but he looks more fitting for like a Desperate Housewives or something like that. You know what I mean? Like it's just not, you know what I mean? Like he's not good, But I mean, yeah, that was pretty much the modus operandi for all of those Bruce Willis movies, right? Is
Oh yeah.
always having a younger dude coming in to kind of prop the film up and do the heavy lifting and deliver the action. Meanwhile, the older guys just kind of be in the background. That's exactly what they were doing with all of Steven Seagal's films around this time. However, I will say, not to completely dog on it, I mean, Van Damme does still get his fair share of action sequences in this film. He does still deliver. I mean, it's not exactly what it once was, back in the mid to late '90s or whatever. But I mean, he does still show up and he comes to play. I would say.
Well, because you make the point that he kept himself in the best shape. Now, I don't think we can fault Dolph too much because Dolph, I think before he was dealing with cancer, he also hurt his hip. And
Right.
you get older, it's not easy to recover from those kind of things, even when you're someone like Dolph. So I think that kind of hurt him a little bit. But I think Dolph did his best to kind of stay in the kind of shape that Van Damme was in. But that was the thing, right? And of course, Van Damme was a little bit younger as well. I mean, he's only a few years younger than Dolph, but a good 10 years younger than Seagal. 5 or 6 younger than like Don the Dragon Wilson and some of those other people. And obviously, like Stallone, he's like almost 15 years younger than Stallone, I think. Right? Because Stallone's going to be 80 this year, and Van Damme was born 19, so they're about 14 years different. So yes, that was one of the things I think that Van Damme had on his side was that one, he's kept himself in better shape, and two, he's younger. And so I think that's the other thing is that you could write this as that kind of geezer teaser thing, like you were describing, with Bruce Willis or something. But when you get Van Damme, suddenly you've got someone who is a little bit more able, right? He doesn't have to spend the whole movie like tied to a chair or whatever it was that poor Bruce Willis would do in some of those movies, or Seagal just sitting behind a desk or behind a steering wheel the whole time. Van Damme is a little bit more capable, so then it's like, okay, well now you kind of base the whole thing around Van Damme doing a lot of the scenes, but yeah, and Flanagan is an interesting choice because I just he is kind of more in the mold, like you said, of like like a Jesse Metcalf in a Bruce Willis movie, or Chad Michael Murray in a Bruce Willis movie, as opposed to a Scott Adkins in this kind of movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about this film is, I know we kind of talked about it on our previous discussions. We talked about it with Kill 'Em All and Darkness of Man and Assassination Games, but it was around the mid to late 2000s where I saw this meme online called Sad Damn, where we just saw Van Damme continually playing burnt out, morose. His dialogue is very limited. This particular film, he's once again leaning into that. However, it does make sense considering the character that he's playing. Let's just say it, he gets the trope of where he lost some innocent lives at the beginning, and so we're hoping throughout the duration of the film that he's going to redeem himself, right? I mean, we've seen that trope has been done. It's I like to call it the cliffhanger syndrome, right? Yeah. Where Stallone at the beginning of Cliffhanger loses the life of this wonderful, lovely, completely innocent woman. He drops her off a mountain, and so we're hoping throughout the duration of the two movies he is going to save the day and redeem himself. And so once again, Jean-Claude is playing that character where he does rescue a little boy at the beginning of the movie, but then due to his recklessness, he blows up the building, and so that kills two young girls. So what that's doing is that's given him complete PTSD, and he's turned himself into a drunk and everything. So I guess his limited dialogue and his limited ability to emote, I guess, makes sense for the character. However, it's not as one note as we've seen in the past, or as it did get later on down the line, and like in films like Kill 'Em All and Darkness of Man. You know what I mean? He is he does get a few scenes where he really does. He gets very teary-eyed and emotional, which I always think is really cool to see. And then there's a scene where he snaps at his son because he is so livid and angry at his son for even recommending him for this mission. You know what I mean? So I did, I always, of course, I'll watch Van Damme in anything, but I always do appreciate it when we see him step out of that zone that we've kind of seen him occupy for so long and give us a little bit more,
Yeah, and I think that's what would attract him to this role. I think he liked that part of it, and Ernie Barbarash, I think as well. He does try to make these movies a little bit deeper than your average direct to video actioner, and I think he really liked this message of there's some lives that are worth more than others in our world, even though that shouldn't be the case. And in this, it's at the very beginning of the movie, right? It's the young boy has a relative, I guess the mother or relative of the mother's has enough money to hire Van Damme to rescue him, while these other girls don't have anybody, and they get left behind, and then they die in the building. And then later in the movie, because there's this idea like that generally these traffickers wouldn't kidnap an American because there's too much heat, especially, famous MMA person. But yet there's this sheikh in Sudan who I think he's kind of maybe based off of Hassan al-Tarabi that used to be the leader of Sudan. But the idea is that he has a lot of money to spend and he wants to buy weapons or do whatever. But the thing is, his number one thing is he wants like a young American girl. And so it makes it worth the risk for them to kidnap the daughter of this MMA guy, but it's still this idea that she's considered worth more than the other girls. Like there's a point where they fake her death and they just grab one of the other girls and kill her. And it's like, and so that kind of resolves itself at the end where the mother is about to trade one of the girls for her daughter.
Yeah.
And they kind of both the mother and father realize like, okay, that we shouldn't have even thought that was a bad thing to think. Everybody's life is worth something. But that reality of he Barbarash seemed, he kind of wants to make trafficking more what it really is and less of this sort of like the urban legend kind of thing that we see in America, that you see in movies and direct to video movies, and that's part of it, I think. And I thought that message came through, and I thought Van Damme did a great job as an actor sort of reflecting that message as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's before I forget, actually, I do think it is kind of funny. We're talking about Steven Seagal, but did you recognize the wife from she not only was she in a previous Steven Seagal film, but she's actually on the cover of one of his DTV efforts. I don't know if you recognized her or not.
So I recognized her, but I didn't remember her from one of his DTV movies. That's crazy. So no, I had no idea.
So I'm not going to say that I remember her in the film,
Right.
but she is on the cover of the DVD of The Foreigner. And if you
Oh, the
remember
Seagal one. Oh, Seagal. Yes.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
yeah.
on the cover of that one. So apparently she had a big role in that one. I can't remember it to save my life,
No,
but
you know why? You know why you don't remember her and why I didn't remember her either. In that movie, in The Foreigner, she's made to look like Elizabeth Shue.
okay.
And so she looks different than she does here, in part because they were trying to make her look like Elizabeth Shue. So that's who you and so if you watch The Foreigner, it's like, oh, that's Elizabeth Shue. Oh no, it's not. No, it's this other actor. But that's I think that's why. Yeah, you wouldn't remember her, but she's like this young woman who she like hires Seagal but doesn't hire. It's weird. It's like there's like a lot of intrigue in that role.
Yeah, yeah, no. But going back to the whole human trafficking angle, I mean, it's it is interesting how this very real, very disturbing, and it's unfortunate that it exists, but subject matter is used as the backdrop for so many of these action films. Obviously there's Taken, like we said. Taken was the one that was interesting because I remember that coming out in 2008. That one was just kind of dumped, I remember, in January, and I don't think anybody really thought much of it. But man, that one caught on
Yeah.
like you wouldn't believe, and that's what kind of set forth Liam Neeson's action career. But what's interesting is, yeah, it's kind of been used as the backdrop for so many of these films. I know it is a cause that Dolph Lundgren feels extremely. It's a cause that he's very passionate about, I think we can say, and he used it for the backdrop for his film Skin Trade, which I actually think is a little bit better than this one, to be perfectly honest. But used it for that one. He also did a documentary called Stopping Traffic. And so, I mean, I feel like, at the end of the day, the casual action fan who's turning on a film like this, and if it does get them to, seek out, support for, stopping this or something like that, then I feel like the films have done their job in a very weird kind of morbid sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I totally agree there. Yeah, but I also think like one of the things I notice a lot of trafficking movies focus on this idea of like suburban American women getting captured and sent to Mexico. That seems to be like the big, and so I think it kind of plays on, certain, xenophobia and things like that. And, there's urban legends that go around, they get passed around on things like Facebook where it's like, oh, if you see a water bottle in your car, don't take it, which makes no sense because if somebody's going to kidnap somebody, they're not going to warn them first. They're just going to kidnap them. But either way, but what trafficking really is it's usually some sort of like, either a relative or somebody who that like somebody who can't speak up or who isn't going to be how do I say, the victim is usually somebody who isn't going to have people to advocate for them, and that's usually why it's almost, I don't want to say it's a crime of opportunity, but that's kind of the idea, is that they generally prey on people that aren't going to be missed if they're, or there's situations where maybe like a mother or a parent is addicted to drugs and they sell the child or something like that. So it's more often that kind of thing than a middle-aged mom at a Hobby Lobby in Arizona, getting whisked away to Mexico, which is what you see in a lot of these movies. And I think Barbarash does a good job of that, where you get these girls who knows how they ended up in this situation in Moldova, and they could have been from anywhere in Eastern Europe. They could have been sold by their parents. They could have been answering a job ad and thinking like, okay, I'm going to go work as a secretary somewhere. And then the next thing you know, your passport's getting burned and you're stuck in this situation. And the way he paints that, but then also says, yeah, Taken, or these other movies where, it's an American that's being kidnapped and taken, no, that's generally not what's done, because, an American brings a lot of heat. It's, there's sort of a bigger, it ends up becoming a bigger issue. And of course you see that in the movie, right? Because all of the brothels get shaken down because of the fact that an American girl is missing. And so it's like this, that he kind of feels like, instead of making it all about the American girl that's kidnapped, he's sort of explaining why they normally wouldn't kidnap an American and why they're going through the trouble to do it. But then also, again, how she sort of has this exalted place as an American girl when she really, that, like all these other girls, what's supposed to happen to these other girls here. And I thought it kind of did, so it did a little bit more, I guess, than a lot of the trafficking movies do. But, to your point, like Taken, yeah, it's like Taken has become like the new Pulp Fiction, I guess, right? Like, or Pulp Fiction, we had this rash of movies in the 2000s of just like talky, ironic hitmen, and like, all kinds of, nefarious deals and capers going on. Taken, now it's like, okay, now it's just straight ahead traffickers all over the place.
Yeah, and I feel like that's, in this day and age, let's be honest, this film was released 14, how many years ago was it now?
Yeah,
14,
14, yeah.
15 years ago or whatever. But I feel like that's still the antagonist that you can make. Nowadays it seems like with a lot of, especially films in the action genre, you don't really know which sensibilities or which nationalities, if you will, or anything like that you're going to upset. So you'll notice a lot of films have to be kind of covert in a weird way, or kind of dance around how they're going to make the villain's the villain. The one of the films that I saw again fairly recently, it's great. I don't know if you've seen it, but No Escape, with Owen Wilson and Pierce Brosnan.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So you could say, I think it takes place in Cambodia, but the film never wants to say Cambodia, never wants to say Thailand or anything like that, because as a result, what you're going to do is then it's going to piss off that nationality, that country, and that things like that. And we don't want to do that. So as a result, you watch that film and it takes place in just some nondescript, unnamed Asian, somewhere in Asia, we can say, but we don't really know exactly which country. For the longest time, it seemed like Russians were always the villain. I think the one with Jason Statham that came out about 2 years ago, Working Man, that still had some Russian villains. But anyway, where I was going with that is, it seems like traffickers will always be the villain that is okay to to make your villain, and rightfully so. That makes total sense. But it is wild to see. There was another film that I actually saw on one of the Roku channels, with Paula Patton and Omar Epps, and this one came out about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, called Traffic, and Luke Goss played the head of that operation. And so same thing, they're kind of running afoul of, they're this yuppie couple that is running afoul of these traffickers who are operating out of motorcycles in a big like semi truck, you know what I mean? And so yeah, I think it's always going to be that that safe villain. They've even done some westerns recently, some kind of on the low budget end westerns, where you see the villains are kidnapping young women or whatever, and taking them cross country or whatever on horseback or whatever. So I think they're it's always that safe antagonist and villain to use.
Yeah, exactly. I always call it baddie in a can. It's like,
There you go. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Made
in
more
the
sense.
90s, it was neo-Nazis or poachers, right? Those were the two that, like, if you plunked a neo-Nazi or a poacher into your movie and and the hero beat the crap out of them, you didn't have to know anything else about those baddies. Yeah, just it was okay. And yeah, the human trafficker has become that now. Yeah, it's interesting too because you're right, like about the Russian mobster baddie. It's like the Russian mob is just such a notorious thing, and in a way, I think to your point too, it's like there's something about the Russian mafia that's different from the Italian mafia in the U.S., where it's the Italian mafia, sort of. I don't say traffic, for lack of a better word, but traffic's in a lot of stereotypes, right, about Italian Americans that a lot of Italian Americans don't like. I think there were protests about The Sopranos, but definitely protests about the Jersey Shore. That there's this idea of like this concept of the stereotypical Italian American that Italian Americans in general in America don't appreciate, but Russians don't quite have that same connection to their organized crime. It's not like Russian mafia becomes like a Russian stereotype, and so it does allow for an easier baddie. And then, of course, when you go to Eastern Europe to make your movie, as Americans, we can't really tell the difference between a Romanian accent and a Russian accent. So it's like you could just have anybody you need in that area play the part of these mafiosos. So that part of it works as well.
Right, exactly. I mean, one of the issues with this film is the fact that, I mean, yes, you do have this baddie in a can, as you can say, but there's really not a clear, a real villain for you to really rally against. And I said this, when I chatted Castle Falls. I'm going back to that one again, and I think it's kind of a trade-off in a weird way that these lower budget efforts have to make, is they kind of have to say, okay, if we're gonna devote so much time and character development to our heroes, then unfortunately we only have so much time, only so many shooting days, whatever it may be. Then unfortunately the villains are going to have to take a back seat, if you will. And I remember I said the same thing with Castle Falls, where you have Dolph. He's a character that is trying to get this money to care for his sick daughter, and you have Scott Adkins. He's this down on his luck MMA fighter who's trying to get back on top, and they're both going after this stash of cash that's in this abandoned hospital. Wonderful, that works great. But unfortunately, it only has 90 minutes and it only had so many shooting days, limited locale. Um, so the bad guys in Castle Falls are really just stock, standard, stereotypical villains. You know what I mean? They really don't have much to work with. And I feel like this, which was made so many years prior to Castle Falls, this is kind of falling under that same disadvantage, if you will, right? You know what I mean? Because it's I mean, Van Damme has a lot to work with here, which I think is really kind of cool. Same thing with his the Joe Flanagan character and his wife. I mean, they get a lot of screen time and everything where they're searching for this daughter. But unfortunately, the villains, I mean, you could say that the big mastermind behind this operation is this dude that's, high up in the government, supposedly. To be honest, Matt, I kind of lost track and didn't really care because it really seems like it was an afterthought, which I don't know, man. At the end of the day, I guess I am happy that, because like I said, you don't get character development and character arcs, especially the redemptive arc. Um, you don't get that too much in these type of films, but so I was able to excuse that a bit. But I mean, man, if what's interesting is, did you see Dolph wrote and directed a film that came out in 2006 called The Russian Specialist. It's also known as The Mechanic.
Oh yes, yeah, I remember that one. Yeah.
Okay, so that one's kind of similar to an extent, where it's also he's on the tail of this big bad Russian mobster dude that is also kidnapping and selling women or whatever. But I mean, that one has a couple bad guys that you really hate. So I feel like they could have done that, but unfortunately, to be honest, I really don't remember the bad guys in this film really really that much.
No, I agree with you on that, and I think the issue that then ends up happening as a result is Ernie Barbarash feels, and I think and I don't know too if this is also the Law brothers who wrote the film. I don't know if there's something there as well. But there's a sense of like, okay, we don't, how are we going to believe that this bad guy is really bad unless he does something really bad? And so the really bad thing he does, even though it's done off screen, we don't see it. We just hear the girl scream, but he cuts her pinky off. And it's kind of like this gratuitous thing that was like, I don't think they needed it. I don't also think that these movies appreciate like what it means to lose a limb, like lose a finger like that. I mean, I've fortunately never had it happen to me, but it's intense pain. It's not something that you just sort of walk around, you bandage up and you walk around after it happens, which is what goes on with this girl. But it was a situation where they were like, well, how do we know this bad guy really means business when we didn't develop him throughout this whole time? Okay, well, we'll have him cut the girl's finger off and that'll do it. And so I think that's the other problem is if you don't develop the baddie enough, you've got to sort of do these more gratuitous things to make us believe that they mean business, and as opposed to doing more organic things throughout the story.
And what's really interesting about that scene, I don't know if you picked up on it or not, but boy, this is a very, kind of morbid, deep cut here. But there's an Australian martial artist named Bren Foster who's now making
Yes.
films. And he did an awesome film about a year and a half ago called Life After Fighting. I don't know if you saw that one or not.
No, not yet. No, I need to see that one.
Okay, that one is really, really cool. It's kind of like this with this one. It probably goes on about 20 minutes longer than it should. But in that one, he is this badass MMA fighter who runs a dojo. And guess who he's on the tail of, Matt? But human traffickers.
Human traffickers, right?
And there is a scene though where the head of the head snake, or the head of the operation or whatever, he cuts off this little boy's pinky just to kind of show that he means business. So you're kind of thinking like, man, were they going through a Rolodex? Okay, what is something we can do to a child on film that is going to be disturbing but not, or maybe Bren Foster and the company saw this particular film, Six Bullets, and decided to kind of crib from that. I don't know, but it is wild that there are two direct-to-video action films starring martial artists where they are going against the nefarious human trafficking worlds, if you will, and they decide to cut off the pinky of a child. I mean, it's bizarre, but having said that, I do recommend you check out Life After Fighting. It's quite good.
Yeah, no, I need to see that. I know Brent Foster's done a few that I need to see, and so he's the one I've got to catch back up with. I think it's always interesting. 'Cause my first experience with him was I can't remember the name of the movie, but it was one of Seagal's, where Brent Foster was doing the heavy lifting, and it was a completely bonkers movie where he screws something up and he gets his hand smashed, and then later in the movie, Danny Trejo uses a bunch of scorpions and stings his hands, and his hands are suddenly healed and he can use them again. Yeah, complete all over the place. But I was like, okay, Brent Foster looks like he's doing some good work here, though. And so, which I guess is the point, right? If you're Brent Foster or Byron Mann, whoever has done the Seagal movies, you show off your martial arts, and even though you're not anywhere near the cover of the movie, your name's not anywhere near the cover, people can at least see it and be like, hey, who is that guy? I'll have to watch some more of his stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think these are guys, they've been in the business for so long as kind of supporting characters that when they're given, the reins to lead the show, similar to Scott Adkins, to where they say, you know what, I realize that this is working with a minuscule budget, but you know what, I'm going to give it my all because it's my face that's telling this thing front and center, which I love. You have to appreciate. So.
Yeah, and Brent Foster, I didn't know. So Brent Foster's actually the same age as Scott Adkins. They're both born in 1976, and so it's one of those things that because these names like Van Damme, Dolph, Don the Dragon Wilson, these guys have held on for so long that they're, I remember when Bronson made Death Wish 5, I think he was like 73, and I was like, okay, that's it. That's the cap. If you're not Bronson, you can't be making movies in your 70s. But now all of these guys, they either are or they're going to be. And I should, not just guys, Cynthia Rothrock is doing it as well. But what it meant was that like people like Brent Foster, Adkins, I think, is the exception because he was able to carve something out. But even like, people that were born in like the late 60s, like Mark Dacascos and Michael Jai White, even they kind of struggled to get roles because, well, let's give the role to Seagal. I think Seagal and Michael Jai White, for example, don't get along. So, Michael Jai White wouldn't get the Brent Foster kind of role in one of his movies. But it's kind of crazy, like that we're here in 2026 and we're like, oh, Brent Foster's one of the new ones, but he's going to be 50 in a few months. And so it's like, it's kind of it's a different world now than it was in the 90s where you had all these guys that were born in the 50s who were like in their late, mid to late 30s that were starting to tear it up then. And they've just held on for so long that these later generations haven't really had an opening.
Yeah, no, I mean, and wouldn't it be amazing? And I've been long saying this, because I mean, what's really kind of cool is, I mean, if you think about it, Jason Statham is, I guess you could say Tom Cruise, but I would say Tom Cruise is one of the last living movie stars that we have. But I would say Jason Statham is one of the only action stars that we still have that is still getting movies delivered in theaters. And I've long been saying this, but I mean, I don't understand why these Jason Statham movies team him up with a Bren Foster or a Scott Adkins or something like that. You know what I mean? And have them be the bad guy, or maybe where they can team up and do some kind of buddy thing. I think that would be amazing. Give these guys a shot on the big screen. But unfortunately, that doesn't look to happen. So, we're just going to have to kind of make do and live with the fact that Scott Adkins and Bren Foster are doing these type of movies. But I think as long as they're at front and center of these films, I think they're going to continue delivering as good of a product as they possibly can, considering the limitations that are in front of them.
Yeah, and I think this maybe goes back to what you were saying about this movie is that I mean, I guess the fact that Bren Foster, I mean, so you've obviously, you've seen Life After Fighting, so you would know like that probably, I guess the budget probably, even though the movie's is long or longer than this movie, right? It's a little over 2 hours, it says. But the budget probably wasn't near what this movie had for a budget, I would think, right?
No, no, no. Yeah, I mean, this one, you look at it now. I mean, this one is, I mean, it's covering a lot of ground considering. I mean, there's multiple sets in this particular film. There's a couple explosions. Some of them are kind of poor CGI explosions, but they do have some decent explosions on display. Then you look at a film like Life After Fighting, which, don't get me wrong, is amazing, but for the most part, it's set at like a dojo. You know what I mean? It's set at his karate studio. You know what I mean? That's pretty much the only set, because I don't think it had much to work with. But in the end, I think it's smart in that it's saying, okay, well, if this is all we have, well, then let's make this the entire set piece and kind of make it, a pseudo siege thriller, if you will. Okay, then that works on that end.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Because I think, I mean, obviously, we covered, Darkness of Man on here, which was another movie that had very limited budget and kind of didn't have, it was what, an hour and 45 minutes, but it felt like it felt longer than this movie for sure. Even though it was only 10 minutes, it was 10 minutes shorter. And yeah, it's like, it's kind of a shame that and I don't see this changing, right? I think you and I have talked about this before too, that like these budgets aren't going in the other direction. This is kind of what the reality is now. But there is something about a movie like this one, that we're talking about, Six Bullets, where you just put, they're not putting ungodly amounts of money behind it, but they're putting money behind it, and so you get. Even the computer effects, I mean, there are some practical effects, but I think even the computer effects of the explosions and things like that look better than the modern CGI computer explosion. And because they're paying somebody who knows what they're doing to make it. And, I think there's something to be said for that kind of thing, that if you put just a little bit more behind the budget and, you're using real blood squibs and you're doing better CGI, that it gives the audience something that's a little bit better that they can hang their hat on. And the other thing is that these movies are all available. So I can go on Tubi and, Six Bullets is there up against all the modern, 2020s DTV. So I can tell the difference. I can see right there, which ones look better. And I think it's kind of an issue now is that, those movies, they have to compete with these movies and they don't always look great compared to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've long said, if my wife and kids would allow it, I often want to cancel Netflix and Max and the paid
Yeah.
services and just rely purely on Tubi. And I can confidently say myself, I would be just fine. I really would. I mean, because the other day when I was watching this one, I was kind of scrolling through and I was like, man, they have everything from Van Damme's back catalog. Hell yes. Like this is great, yeah. So if people out there still, what's interesting is it seemed like about 10 years ago, Tubi was still kind of this kind of uncharted, unknown frontier that a lot of people didn't know about. Now it seems to, I think a lot of it too is thanks to the World Cup because
Yes.
the Tubi was streaming a lot of the World Cup. So now um, Tubi has kind of become this force to be reckoned with a little bit, where it's much more known than it once was, which of course makes me happy to see. But yeah, no, I've been praising the stuff from Tubi. I mean, their original content is kind of crap. Let's be perfectly honest. But then again, the original content from Netflix, I don't think is really that much better. But yeah, no, I mean, if anybody who's listening that doesn't know about Tubi, for crying out loud, it's the best untapped streaming service that's out there.
Yeah, I think I always joke about this that I think I spend more time scrolling Tubi and adding things to my playlist than I do actually watching things on Tubi. Like, because I'm just like always looking, oh, what else do they add? What have they put on here now? But yeah, I mean, for me, because sports, I've got, pretty much like all of the packages we have in some way they involve sports. I think HBO Max, I think, because there's shows and movies on there, and then Netflix we do. But like Disney Plus we have because I have ESPN Plus and you get the bundle for that. Or Paramount Plus, I have that for soccer. And so that's the biggest problem for me is that, that's why we haven't gotten rid of cable because my wife also watches baseball. So it's like, we haven't been able to pull the plug on cable yet because we got to figure out how to do baseball still. But I think we're close. Like cable is just getting so expensive now, and I think some of these streamers are getting so expensive that like you said, Tubi. You could pair Tubi and Pluto. It's like, Pluto you can do the live TV, and I think Tubi has live channels as well. But Pluto, it's like you can just put something on, you just have like, show after show. But Tubi, it's like there are so many TV shows and movies and things like that on there that you could go through that for you could take you go years and probably not look at see everything.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. So, but yeah, no, I mean, yeah, it's kind of going back to this film, for final recommendation. I mean, it's at the end, it's a very simple meat and potatoes action film. Young girl is kidnapped and by some nefarious human trafficker gang or whatever, and Van Damme, who's a former spec ops soldier mercenary, is hired by a family to go retrieve her. You know what I mean? I think in the end, it's funny that you mentioned the Law Brothers, but I actually did have the pleasure of, when I did my podcast, I did interview and speak with Chad Law.
Oh,
Um,
nice. Yeah.
yeah, back when I did my show. And it was a really interesting conversation because he pretty much, alluded to with the way these things are written, where basically they will say, okay, hey, look, we have this actor available for 2 weeks. All right, we have this location that we're working with. We kind of want to do a search and rescue type movie. Can you come up with something? And so, with those parameters, they have to put together a script. And I'd be willing to bet I'd be I don't think I'm wrong in assuming this, but I'd be willing to bet that that's what happened with this particular film. Is after Assassination Games and the success of that one, they had Ernie Barbarash once again, because I think this one has the same producing team as Assassination Games as well. But they had Ernie Barbarash and Van Damme on hand. We're going to be, once again, this is going to be set in Romania, so we're working with the Eastern European locale. Can you do something? Because I mean, if you look at Chad Law's work, and I do like a lot of his films, but his films, I don't want to say are generic, but they're working with a lot of the same kind of tropes that you've seen in other films. It almost feels like, in a lot of ways, when he and his brother are writing their scripts, that they're just kind of, playing Mad Libs, if you will, and just kind of pulling from
Right.
various Rolodex files and just kind of including this ingredient here and this ingredient there. And so I think that kind of happened with this one. But I think, it actually is much better than I certainly gave it credit for back when I saw it in 2012. I'm not going to put it in Van Damme's top 10 by any means, but I think it is certainly much better than some of the other ones that we've discussed on this podcast. And the other interesting thing too, before I forget, I just want to say is coming off I don't know if you picked up on this either, but coming off the heels of Assassination Games, did you notice how this one looked so much more like a real traditional movie compared to Assassination Games? Assassination Games just had that very distracting sepia, Mr. Bean quality to it in terms of its cinematography. Did you notice that? And how this one scrapped that and didn't have that? I don't know what went through in the post-production with Assassination Games where they decided on that for that one, but this one they wisely made it look like an actual movie. So I appreciated that.
Yeah, I wonder if it was because from a shooting schedule standpoint, maybe like they were able to shoot more in the same light. And so then, okay, if we're all shooting during the day, we can keep it brighter. Whereas, because I think that's a lot of the reason why they do that sort of that sepia tone, that kind of like washed out digital look, is that they want to sort of even out the color for the whole movie, and it's easier just to even it out as dark than it is to even it out as bright. And I wonder if he had more to work with when he made this movie. And that might have also played into the fact that Scott Adkins couldn't do the movie. If maybe like, okay, well now Scott Adkins is out, and maybe he only had a short window. Okay, now that we don't need him. If again, we were just speculating that Adkins might have been offered this, but it's like you said, it feels like a movie that when when the Law Brothers are writing this movie, it sounds like a movie that would have said, okay, you've got Van Damme and Atkins for this period of time, write this movie. But I do wonder, it does kind of feel like maybe a lot of the shooting is during the day, and I wonder if that's what it was that they had more time to use actual lights, and then they could keep it brighter. Because you're right, it definitely looks different than Assassination Games did.
Yeah, yeah, and that's definitely a perk that this one has over Assassination Games. Most definitely.
Now, one thing I wanted to mention too about this movie is that the stunt coordinator he's listed now as Ristoff Dion, but at that time he would have been Dion Ristoff. I don't know why his name was listed one way or the other, but I mean he's very famous stunt guy. I mean he doubles Seagal. Most of the movies that you watch, that Seagal period, that we were talking about, where he's sitting a lot and he's doubled a lot. A lot of it is Dion Ristoff. He's also been Dolph's stunt double. He was his stunt double in One in the Chamber. But he's done a fair amount of Dolph movies as well. And I think he was kind of the Millennium guy's go-to stunt guy. And so he's kind of moved his way up. He's doing he does the Blank Has Fallen movies, which I think those are Millennium films as well, right? The Olympus Has Fallen, London Has Fallen. But he worked stunts on the second John Wick movie. It's kind of cool to see him in this movie. I do get a sense that when you get some of these really good, really well established stunt coordinators doing the movie, I do think there was a little bit something that you get a little something extra there, and I think that also helped this movie as well. That you had someone who, like of his pedigree, doing the action directing for it.
Absolutely, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and I think it can tell. I mean, for the most part, you can kind of tell. There's a few scenes where Jean-Claude's Sam Gall character, when he's coming in. There's a couple scenes where you can tell it's a stunt double, but it's not as obvious and overt as other films. I think that there's the scene where it's right when Joe Flanagan's character goes into the bar and he starts throwing down with some guys, but then he gets beat up, and then the lights go out, and Jean-Claude's character comes in and kind of saves the day and starts kicking their asses. But it's funny because he turns out the lights and his character is wearing a like a night vision goggle mask, you
Right.
know. So it's kind of like, okay, well, there's our stunt double there. But then there's a couple scenes like at the beginning of the film when he's going to rescue that boy. Um, you can tell that that's him throwing the kicks and everything, which is a I was very pleased at that.
Yeah, he definitely wanted us to see that he could still do it. I mean, if we move on with Barbarash and we do the third of those movies, I think that third one, Pound of Flesh, he really shows off. He does the splits in that movie, and he's really showing that. But I think he was proud of the fact that I think he's proud of the fact that he stayed in shape. But I always get the sense from him that he also recognized that he was older. He liked playing. I don't like is the right word. Maybe that's a too strong a word, but he leaned into playing older characters and accepted that he was getting older. And I do think that was a kind of a refreshing thing, to see that, that he's not like, like in this movie, for example, just like the previous movie, right? He has that kind of awkward romance with the sex worker, that, doesn't end well for her, unfortunately. But this movie, there's like no romance. There's no romantic love interest for him in this one at all. And I kind of like that he's, it's not like, oh, hey, I get to hook up with somebody who's 30 years my junior or something like that. He's playing a guy who's like, I think he's divorced. And because I think that's kind of the sense we get when he's talking to his son. But it's definitely like he's not like picking this for a vanity reason. He wants to kind of delve into this character, but at the same time, he does want the world to know that he's been keeping himself in good shape, and he's proud of that too.
And can we also say too? I can't believe we haven't brought this up, but I think it was around this time, maybe a year or two prior, where it suddenly started going into Jean-Claude's contract. I think where it was, oh, if you want to hire Van Damme for a role, great, but you're going to need to find a role for his son.
Yeah, and
And
daughter.
Yeah, and in this one we also get his daughter too.
Yeah,
What's like, almost kind of comical, I think, about his daughter's character is his daughter is one of the villains. His
right.
daughter
Yeah,
is pretty much the scout who helps lure these unsuspecting girls to this trafficking organization or whatever. But did you notice? Unless I missed something, but it seems like that character, his daughter's character, just leaves the film. Just I mean, we never really see her character
no, she
again.
gets killed. She gets
Oh, does she get
killed.
okay?
Yeah.
Oh,
So what happens is that now this is it's an interesting turning point in the film. So because of the heat that the American, that the the parents are putting on everything, and is causing all these issues with the brothels, that kind of the head honcho guy, actually it's a head honcho guy who's kind of in the middle. That Dolph, remember Dolph like carves the girl's name into his stomach, and it's kind of, kind of really dark stuff there. But that guy says, shut it down, get rid of the girl, end the whole thing. And so then the one who ends up being the baddie, the end baddie, goes in to kill her. And Van Damme's daughter's like, no, no, why don't we cut out this other guy? We don't need these other people. Let's do the deal ourselves and make all this money. And I don't think she realized what she was doing when she said that she was like, oh, I am giving this guy the roadmap for how to cut us out as well. And so, of course, there's like that tense moment where she goes to get a gun to shoot him, but he shoots her first, and then he also shoots the other guy. And then they fake the daughter's death so that everybody thinks the daughter's dead, but they can still sell her
Okay,
off.
and I did pick up on all that, but
Yeah.
for me, it seemed like his daughter Bianca, her character, I missed her because she certainly wasn't at the end at the final shootout or any of that.
No, no, she gets killed well before that. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. So when they fake the daughter's death, that gangster kills Van Damme's daughter and the other guy that's like supposed to be like her partner in crime or whatever. Yeah, they get killed off there. So yeah, it's not a big part. She, remember, she was also in Assassination Game, and all she was doing was sleep. She was in a coma in that movie, I believe, right? She was Atkins's comatose wife. Yeah, she gets the bigger role coming up in, is it Alien Uprising?
Rising, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
which Van Damme does for like 5 minutes, I think, just to kind of help the movie out. I mean, it comes out the same year as this, I believe. It also comes out in 2012, but that's like a bigger role for her. She's kind of a star in that movie, and then he just shows up at the very end. I think kind of help her out. But yeah, I think it's one of those things where I think he was getting back together with his ex-wife, and I think he wanted to make up for all this lost time with his kids, and it was like, well. Yeah, they can make a movie with me. We can spend a few weeks together, or however long we're shooting this movie for. And so he was getting them these roles in these movies. And to be fair, I think this one was. Usually his son plays a baddie, and he's like beating the crap out of his son in these movies. So this was kind of a nice change of pace.
Yeah, yeah. No, they never really say how his son. I mean, it is kind of an interesting dynamic where he's a mercenary or whatever who's tasked with retrieving children. That's his job, and then his son works for the U.S. Embassy.
Right.
Okay, I don't really know how that worked out, but all right.
Right, exactly. It's almost like the part is written in just so the two of them can have those moments that actually the moments work really the moments between the two of them work better than the explanation for why the son is there in that role.
Yeah, yeah. No, but I mean, they have. I will say they have a good. They have a great rapport, and I mean, is his son? What is his son's name? Christopher
Chris.
Van Damme. Chris. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is he going to have the next big great career? Probably not. But I mean, the roles I've seen him in, he actually does deliver a fairly good performance. He's actually coming full circle. Actually, he's actually in Mexicali
Right,
with
with Bren Foster.
Brent
Yeah.
Foster, which man, this is totally coming full circle for you, Matt. But it is available on Tubi, so
Oh, yeah, I know. I got to get into more Bren Foster because I've got those to see. Then also, the guys at the Deep Blue Sea podcast were telling me that because he's in the third Deep Blue Sea, there's two Deep Blue Sea direct to video sequels, and Bren Foster does the second of those two sequels, part three. So there's a lot of Bren Foster out there that I got to catch up with. He also has a new one, Beast. That's kind of like everybody's talking about Beast. So he's yeah, I gotta get caught up on my Bren Foster.
yeah, yeah, definitely no. But yeah, no. As always, I mean, I don't know if there's anything we haven't touched upon with this one, but I don't know. I think stacked up next to Assassination Games. I think I'm probably going to have to give Assassination Games a slight edge over this one, mainly because it does have Scott Adkins. I think he's a more intriguing presence than Joe Flanagan, and it does have a better villain that you really hate and that you really want to see his demise. Having said that, I do like Van Damme's character better in this one, so it's kind of I don't know if that makes any kind of sense. I'm kind of flipping back and forth and changing my allegiances to both sides, but if that makes any sense at all, I think I would give Assassination Games the edge over this one slightly, but that's a very razor thin margin there.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's only those few things. I think it's the Atkins factor versus the Joe Flanagan factor. But on the other hand, it's like, man, I feel like Assassinations Game got darker in places that, I mean, this movie was dark like that. But I mean, like, when Van Damme is having that moment with the sex worker and then she gets murdered, that was like, boy, that was really dark. But yeah, I agree with you. The other thing too is that Assassination Game is about 15 minutes shorter, and I think that also plays in its favor. So yeah, I think between these two, but like to your point, I mean, I think this, if they both weren't so long, they'd make a great double feature. I guess it depends on how much time you have, because you're going to be closer to 4 hours as opposed to 3 hours. Usually these double features are hour and a half a piece. 3 hours isn't too bad, but if you've got an afternoon to kill, weekend afternoon or something like that, and you're looking for some new Van Damme that you haven't seen before. Pairing Assassinations Game and Six Bullets isn't a bad deal.
No, no, absolutely not. Yeah, I'd much rather watch these two a couple times again rather than the Kill 'Em All pairing that we did a few months back. So
Right. Yes. Yeah. I mean, that second Kill 'Em All, which I don't think either of his kids were in that one, but that second one, that was just like, hey, do you want to spend a week on the Adriatic coast of Italy? We'll pay for it. And Van Damme's like, Yeah, what do I got to do? Well, we're gonna make a sequel to Kill 'Em All 2. Okay, if you're gonna have me live in that beautiful location for a week, I guess I'll do it.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. It just goes to show how much how much the market has changed and become decimated within the last 12 years. I mean, I think that's what is one of the best things, maybe not the best thing, excuse me, but that is an interesting comparison that we can make is look at this particular film, which came out in 2012, and then look at a film like Kill 'Em All 2 or Darkness of Man, which came out in what 2024 or
Yeah.
whatever, and you can just see in just that small amount of time, those 12 years, how things had changed so much and how much cheaper it all became. It really is. It's very very jarring, and yeah, and then like I said, what is it that rock band Cinderella once
Yeah.
said? Don't know what you got till it's gone. And boy, is
Yes.
that not the truth, right?
Yes, for sure. They're from here in Philadelphia. I got that. There's a music walk of fame, so I had to get the picture. They are on the music walk of fame here in Philadelphia. If you're ever on Broad Street near like Walnut Street, it's kind of center part of the city. Yeah, you can see that. But yeah, I would say we at the time we were comparing these 2012 movies to like the movies from the 90s that were ubiquitous at that time because of the cheap DVD market then. So you could go into a Walmart and get, I mean, I remember Showdown in Little Tokyo. I still have my $5 DVD of that I got at Walmart with the gatefold opening and all of that. But we were comparing these movies to that when we should have been, we had no idea, like you said, that what this industry was going to be. And I guess, at 2012, you couldn't have known because, like, we talk about like Bruce Willis and the Geezer teasers, and those were still a little ways away. Like Randall Emmett hadn't quite gotten into like that model, that paradigm that he ended up using so much of, okay, we're going to get this actor in the movie. We're going to barely use him, but his face is going to be on the tin. We're going to shoot this thing in one location, get it done as fast as possible, pay the workers as little as possible, have them sleeping four to a room if we can, and we're going to pump this thing out. And then, you know, people are going to see it and see that Bruce Willis is in it, and they're going to want to watch it. Big name critics might even review it. It might get in Entertainment Weekly or something like that, and then we can even get it in the theaters in Europe and make some money off of it. And Ernie Barbarash making these movies is so far removed from that concept of what a movie became under Randall Emmett that it's too bad. And I think people were too no, we were too blind to it. Maybe I don't know. There's this sense of like everybody wanted to kind of make fun of those Bruce Willis movies and get a kick out of them. And I don't think people realized how bad the cynicism was in those and how it was going to change how these direct-to-video movies are made now.
Yeah, no, no. But yeah, no, I do really, as always, man. I always really appreciate you coming on and inviting me. And I don't know what we have left in terms of his direct to video output, but you know me, I'm always game. So just
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've got, if we want to finish off the Barbarash trilogy, there's Pound of Flesh. So, that's one we could definitely do. And, that one's, I think that one's on Tubi as well. Yeah. So, another,
yeah,
what's interesting about Pound of Flesh is that it kind of comes and goes on things like Tubi. And I'm not sure why that is. Maybe, when we look at this one, maybe we'll see like that there's some interesting, maybe there's producers or something involved that make it so it gets different distribution or something. I don't know. It has a different writer. It's written by Joshua Todd James, so it's not written by the Law Brothers. So I wonder if there's something about this one, Pound of Flesh, that makes it a little bit unique.
well, I mean, the thing I've noticed about Tubi is it may be gone from Tubi, but that just means it'll most likely be on Prime
Yeah.
or on Peacock, the following week. What's really kind of funny is he had the film Nowhere to Run that
Yeah.
he did that came out I think in 92, 93 or whatever. And I was watching that and then that left and it was gone for maybe a week and then it was back on there. So I don't know how it works with the licensing and the rights and everything like that, but if it leaves, don't worry, it'll be back.
Right.
So
We'll see it again soon. Exactly. Exactly. Perfect. Well, thank you again, Sean, for coming on. This was another really fun conversation about a movie that, again, I think just like the last movie we talked about, it looks better now in 2026 than it did when it came out.
absolutely, yeah, no, absolutely. This was a lot of fun. I would not have. I would not have watched it again had it not been for this invite, and I'm really glad I did because it made me kind of reappreciate it and reevaluate it once again, which I unfairly kind of wrote it off back in 2012.
Yeah.
So thank you.
No, thank you. Same thing. I don't think I would have watched this again either. And I would have had in my head this idea of like, oh, it's this bloated, 2 hour movie that, needs to get over itself or whatever it was that I probably wrote at the time. I watch it now and I'm like, wow, this feels a lot better than a lot of stuff. It looks like I've Ty from Comeuppance Reviews on, and we do more, current direct-to-video movies. And you just too much bad CGI, too much, actors that are on the tin and we don't see much of them. To get something like this, it's like, okay, yeah, this is nice. So yeah, I'm glad we revisited this as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you, and you have a good night, and I'll talk to you when I talk to you.
Absolutely. I'll talk to you soon. And thank you everybody for listening. We'll be back soon. Bye, everyone.